My name is Kathy Garcia, and I'm 68 years old. What I'm about to tell began one warm evening in Austin, Texas, at a dinner I should never have agreed to attend. The dining room buzzed with the clinking of silverware and the polite laughter of relatives who barely noticed I existed. They seated me at the far end of the long table, near the sliding door, a spot that made me feel like an afterthought. I smiled when I had to, nodded at the right moments, but my plate held more quiet than sustenance. I watched my son Daryl, seated proudly near the table's center, and his wife Sabrina beside him, wearing a linen dress that shimmered under the soft light. She spoke with authority, a commanding tone that drew attention even when her words stung. She swirled her wine glass, leaning forward like an actress about to perform. Her voice sliced through the conversation, asking how it felt for me to live without contributing anything anymore. The laughter that followed was shallow, nervous, but laughter nonetheless. Even my grandson Mateo, still in high school, smirked as if to join in. The sting cut deeper than any knife. My chest tightened, and for a fleeting moment, I wanted to vanish into my chair. Yet I set my glass of water down with deliberate care. The sharp clink silenced the table. My back straightened, and I fixed my gaze on Sabrina. The room seemed to pause as I spoke, not in anger, but with steady resolve. I told them that this unhelpful old woman would no longer cover their expenses. The silence that followed pressed against the walls, clinging to every breath. Sabrina's smile faltered into confusion. Daryl's fork froze halfway to his mouth, and Mateo's gaze dropped. I felt my words ripple through them, not because I yelled, but because I stopped pretending. My chair scraped the wooden floor as I stood, my stance final and unyielding. I gathered my purse, nodded once to no one in particular, and walked out through the patio doors. The evening air greeted me like an old friend, cool, honest, and grounding. Beyond the garden, the Texas sky stretched vast and deep, painted in the fading light of day. For the first time in years, my lungs felt full, as though I'd been holding my breath all this time. I stood there, listening to the hum of cicadas and the fading clink of glasses behind me. In that instant, I realized I had crossed an invisible line, leaving behind the role of silent provider. The night opened before me with possibility, and I understood I hadn't truly breathed freely in years. When I returned home that evening, the silence of my small house felt heavier than the voices I had left behind. I walked to my office and opened the bottom drawer of an old wooden cabinet. Inside were folders worn from years of handling, their edges curled, carrying a weight far beyond the paper within. Each folder held a fragment of my story, though none of it was the part my family would care to read. I pulled one out and spread its contents across the desk. Copies of late-night transfers appeared when Sabrina had overspent again. Receipts for boutique rent when the shop couldn't pay. Notes covering Daryl's credit card bills when his balances grew too embarrassing to admit. Tuition payments for Mateo's private school. Fees that should have been shared somehow fell solely on me. Every page echoed a whispered call, a quiet request disguised as necessity. Being an accountant had trained me to track records, and that habit became my lifeline. I opened hidden spreadsheets on my computer, each line filled with dates, amounts, and reasons. At first, I thought tracking it all would help me feel in control. Over time, the growing totals felt less like control and more like chains. What had started as love slowly morphed into duty, until it became a rhythm I no longer questioned. Transfers became automatic, as if I were less a person than a system designed to catch them before they fell. I remembered the first time Sabrina kissed my cheek and whispered she didn't know what they'd do without me. For a fleeting moment, I believed it was gratitude. Later, I understood it as a warning. I had become their safety net, reliable, invisible, a cushion allowing them to take risks without fear. Each page in that folder was a wound, poorly healed, leaving scars of silence. As I turned them, I saw that my identity had been rewritten line by line. I was no longer Kathy, the mother, Kathy, the woman, or even Kathy, the retiree. I had become a shadow carrying their burdens. Sitting quietly in that office, I finally recognized the truth inked in numbers. I was no longer living for myself. I existed solely as their silent safety net, and the weight of that realization pressed harder than any debt I had ever covered. I remember the year 2016 with a clarity that makes my chest ache. Sabrina's boutique was unraveling before it had fully begun. Rent was overdue, suppliers demanded payment, and the dream she flaunted to the family teetered on collapse. Daryl's savings were drained, the bank had said no, and they came to me with desperation hidden beneath polished words. I agreed to help, but not without conditions. I offered $55,000, but only if Sabrina signed a notarized agreement. The paper was simple but firm. In exchange for my money, I would hold 51% ownership of the boutique. This wasn't generosity, it was protection. Sabrina barely skimmed the document, hands trembling, her voice clipped with impatience. She signed quickly, sliding it back as if it were just another receipt to file. The notary stamped it, and I tucked it into a folder the next morning. From that day forward, I carried the contract like a quiet shield. It remained in my drawer year after year, buried under transfers and favors. I said nothing, and I let her believe that my silence meant I was naive, soft, or forgetful, too weak to ever confront her. What she never realized was that I had spent my entire life being underestimated. And underestimation has a way of honing a person. Sometimes I'd open the drawer and find the pages resting among records of all the sacrifices I had made. I would run my fingers across the bold ink, my name and hers intertwined. It reminded me that even while I was being used, I had planted a safeguard. She thought I had forgotten. I never did. I simply waited. There was a bitter sting in remembering how easily she dismissed me, how quickly she signed without even glancing. Yet beneath that bitterness, a seed of strength had taken root. That contract was proof. I was far from powerless. For years, my giving had erased me. But that single document told another story. In the quiet of my home, I realized I had not been defeated. I had been patient, and patience carries its own power. One afternoon, Sabrina arrived. Her voice was sweet, rehearsed. She spoke of growth, opportunity, how the boutique could expand if she only had the right backing. Then she mentioned the figure, $70,000, spoken casually, as though it were nothing more than a favor. She asked me to co-sign the loan, insisting it was just a formality. I looked her squarely in the eyes and said, firmly, that I would not sign. I told her I would no longer be the one to rescue them. Not this time, not ever again. The silence that followed my refusal spoke louder than any argument. She laughed it off, pretending indifference, but I saw the crack in her confidence. A few days later, Daryl and Sabrina arrived at my home. Daryl's eyes held unease. Sabrina's mouth was a tight line. They sat across from me, the room thick with unspoken demands. I walked to the cabinet, retrieved the thick folder that had sat there for years, and placed it on the coffee table between us. Daryl reached for it first, hesitant, brow furrowed as he began to read. At first, confusion flickered across his face, then shock set in. He turned to Sabrina, holding up the notarized contract granting me majority ownership. His voice cracked. Had she really signed this? Sabrina's denial came fast, sharp, dismissive. She called it manipulation, accused me of taking advantage of her vulnerability. I leaned back in my chair, voice calm yet edged with steel. I told them it wasn't manipulation, it was accountability. I reminded them of the nights filled with hushed calls, the mounting bills, the times I stepped in to prevent collapse. I hadn't taken control then. I had simply made sure my sacrifices weren't erased. The room fell silent. Daryl held the papers in his lap, pale, quiet, their silence louder than any defense. Sabrina's protest grew thinner, weaker. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. For years, I had been the invisible support, the quiet giver. Now the truth was on paper, undeniable, and it was their turn to sit in silence. Then came the thick envelope delivered to my door. Inside, words I had anticipated but dreaded. Sabrina was suing me, claiming the contract was signed under pressure, that I had exploited her distress. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers, the old weight pressing down. Then I picked up the phone and called Donna Ruiz, a retired litigator with a mind as sharp as glass. Calm and certain, She asked for every scrap of evidence I had kept over the years. I brought her the notarized contract, bank transfers, receipts for tuition, rent, and boutique expenses. She laid them out meticulously, fingers tracing dates and signatures, then looked up at me with a nod of confidence. This would hold. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was hushed. Sabrina sat stiff beside her attorney, eyes flashing with rehearsed indignation. Daryl was behind her, drawn, weary, silent, his silence louder than her words. Donna stood when called, presenting the documents. Her voice was steady, her arguments rooted in fact. She showed the judge the notarized contract, the transfers marked by bank records, the clear trail of my financial involvement. Sabrina's lawyer spoke of coercion, of undue influence, painting me as a manipulative mother-in-law preying on vulnerability. But the judge, a silver-haired woman with decades of careful listening etched into her features, was unswayed by rhetoric. She examined every page, then lifted her gaze. Her ruling was simple. The evidence was clear. Ownership stands. The sound of the gavel echoed like finality. Sabrina flinched, her complexion draining, confidence gone. Daryl lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. I felt no triumph, no need to celebrate. What I felt was the deep relief of truth finally spoken aloud, unerasable. Stepping outside the courthouse, sunlight poured across the steps, warm on my face. I inhaled slowly, filling my lungs with air that felt new, as though I had waited years for this single breath. The city hummed around me, distant and irrelevant. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the light remind me. I was still here, standing in my own freedom. 6 months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt entirely mine. I had moved into a small house near a lake in Austin. Mornings bathed in soft light, filled with birdsong. My days began with hands in the soil, tending herbs and flowers that grew stronger alongside me. Afternoons were for painting clumsy landscapes or sitting with women and young students learning the basics of money management. Teaching gave me purpose, and for the first time in decades, I felt useful and free on my own terms. One bright afternoon, Mateo arrived, grinning shyly, holding a folded sheet of paper. It was a drawing of Grandma's garden, crooked flowers and a sun smiling above. My heart swelled in a way no contract or payment ever could. I placed the drawing on the refrigerator, knowing it was a gift of pure love, free of obligation. Later that week, the phone rang. Daryl's voice cracked through. He admitted mistakes, confessed that pride and weakness had guided him, and asked if we could try again. I paused, weighing the years behind us. Then I told him I would not rescue him, but I would give him a chance to stand on his own. It wasn't forgiveness yet, just the door left open for him to walk through if he chose. That evening, Mateo knelt beside me in the garden as the sun dipped low over the lake. I pressed a small plant into his hands, showing him how to place it in the soil. I told him even broken ground can bloom again if cared for. As we covered the roots with earth, a gentle peace settled over me. Family, I realized, isn't about money. It's about respect and the courage to start over. Standing with Mateo in the fading light, I understood that healing doesn't come from winning or losing. It comes from knowing when to stop giving pieces of yourself and when to let others carry their own weight. Boundaries aren't walls. They are lines that protect love from becoming burden. My journey taught me that respect cannot be begged or bought. It must be chosen by both sides. If you've ever felt invisible or taken for granted, remember, it's never too late to reclaim your voice and plant something new in your life. I'd love to hear what this story made you think. Share your reflections in the comments below. If it touched your heart, press like, subscribe, and turn on the bell to never miss another story of strength and renewal.